All right, a big hello and good afternoon, at least if you're in the Eastern time zone. Good afternoon to our LinkedIn and YouTube friends out there. I wanted to do this special live episode today because I'm joined by my friend and former coworker and author of two books. He's got his second book out now, Jeff Jones. Jeff is the author of Seven Keys to Persuasive Speaking, and most recently, Overcoming the Innovation Killers. That's his second book that was published just recently. When did it come out, Jeff?
Probably maybe a month ago.
Okay, so about a month
It's still
ago
pretty
is
recently.
yeah. It's Jeff sent me a message and said, "Hey, this is coming out, and you want to check it out?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, I want to check it out." So, in full transparency, if you know me, if you've ever heard me talk about reading books, you know that I actually listen to books these days. I think I actually may have forgotten what all those little symbols on the piece of paper mean, but so I listened to Overcoming the Innovation Killers on Audible, which is a platform that I burn that up every day, essentially.
Same
And
here.
I really enjoyed the book. Number one, because it really it harkens back to some of the work that you and I did together a couple of years ago, and so some of it was very familiar. But it also really speaks to a lot of the work that I do in different communities and with clients now. And this idea of innovation, I think, is critical. And you know the different perspectives that you share in the book, I think, have a lot of impact. And in full transparency, Jeff also joined me and a group of architects last week in a backstage session a uh, for a challenge that I ran last week. And those architects, even though that might not be the audience that you would have necessarily guessed for overcoming the innovation killers, they got a lot out of that conversation, and
Good. Good.
especially the image, I guess, the visual of being a box of cereal on a shelf. And so we can get into that, but I guess maybe the place to start, Jeff, is um, who's this book written for?
I would say two things about that. First of all, for marketing reasons, which I'm sure a lot of you understand, uh, we kind of position it for the kind of CPG product managers so that they can innovate and create new products. But the more I talk about the book, the more I realize it is for anyone who has some kind of message or product that they're trying to have an impact on someone else. So, I mean, it goes all the way, like we were talking before we started. It could be anybody from a church that wants to find out about how to be more effectively reach millennials, or it could be a nonprofit trying to understand how to resonate with donors for their charity. And it can be for a service company, which their service is their product. And of course, it can be for anybody who actually creates new products. But it really all comes down to anybody who wants to make that connection with another party.
And that makes a lot of sense because in the heart of the book somewhere is this idea of cutting through noise and commoditization, which I think in my experience and our experience together, just about everybody is facing those types of challenges. So I think when you say it's for everybody, I mean, on one hand, it's like, well, what do you mean this is for everybody? But I think you're right. I think there's an application for everybody here.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is as I started writing the second book, I started trying to outline these three challenges, these three kind of fears anybody who's going to innovate anything faces. And that kind of came out. I didn't even realize it at the time. I was almost halfway through the book before I realized this entire thing is structured the same way that I suggest you structuring your communication in the first book, which is the idea of really being able to boil down your message into a handful. For some reason, three is a magic number, but a handful, three different challenges or fears or pains an audience is experiencing, and then going through the process of alleviating that pain with your presentation, with your product, with your pitch, by walking them through, this is how we solve it, and let me give you some proof. And that seems like such a simple structure, taking someone through problem number one, solution number one, evidence number one, two, 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 three, 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 and then kind of laying out how the future looks for them. Seems like such a simple thing, but you got to understand that those structures that are in both of these books go all the way back, maybe even before, but definitely Aristotle talked about the magic of having these three clearly defined messages that you're trying to get across. And so it's trying to tap into something that's ancient and get us to remember it effectively.
Yeah, so there's a great history lesson for everybody. Any of you that are out there, Jeff didn't use the word storytelling, but anybody that's out there that's, wondering, okay, is it, this new idea of innovation or breaking through the noise or whatever, it's all of this, just like storytelling is, this is not 2021 ideas. This is tried and true and tested, information and methodologies that, like you said, date back to Aristotle. And so, on the other, also by contrast, if you have somebody saying, hey, let's do this new thing called storytelling, well,
Yeah.
maybe not so new. So let me ask you this. 2 books now, and like you said, they're definitely related. What drove you to write this one?
My whole career, the background of my career is I was involved, first of all, in advertising. And I started to realize toward the end, actually kind of toward the end of a long period, probably 20 years, that we talk a lot about a product, but if you cannot develop a product that resonates with a consumer, all the words, all the pictures, all the cute commercials are not going to motivate you to buy it. It hasn't always been this way. Early in advertising, often the agency would make significant suggestions about how to innovate the product so that it would have a unique feature that addressed a problem that the target audience was having. All those things have kind of broken up, and so an agency now is only about communication. A media agency is about buying all the contracts and putting the message on television.
Mm.
And an innovation agency is about creating the new product. The problem is there hasn't been a consistent way of understanding the audience that spans all of those. And so as I was looking at it, I was very pleased, although it was my first, so there's a lot of things I would change, but I was pleased with the first book, but I felt as though it was really only a part of the message, that you also had to then go back and talk to other people, other innovators, about how do you make sure from start to finish your innovation doesn't leave you at the end of it in a what we usually call a sea of sameness. And the example I gave the other day when we were talking is, imagine being a marketing manager at Kellogg's. And I've worked with Kellogg's many, many times. I love that organization. They're very smart. But imagine being a manager, marketing manager, or product manager, and you walk into the store to do kind of a walkthrough to see what else the competition looks like. And you see, a 40-foot long shelf set down the middle of the store with virtually every cereal you could possibly think of, going from healthy cereals to sugary cereals to co-branded cereals with cartoon characters to ones that say they're for old people like me and solve certain problems. And you've got that set. And then you go back to your office and you say, now I have to come up with an idea that will set aside, will make me stand out in that shelf of 300 different cereals. Matter of fact, immigrants often say one of the most overwhelming moments is when they go into a U.S. Grocery store and see all the choices, and that it's overwhelming. And I think consumers experience that. I think even in business to business, we experience that, where a decision maker, you're pitching your service. There's a decision maker. Extending from the decision maker, there's an audience member or a customer or a user or a visitor. There's someone else in that dynamic. and they've got to make a decision, and they're asking the question, why you and not someone else? Why now and not tomorrow? And we've got to answer those questions by being the person that's most tapped in to the problem, challenge, fear of that end experiencer of the product, service, or charity, or whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, that, like I said earlier, when we were talking the other night, in the backstage of this challenge I was running, and you used that example that you just shared, the cereal, amongst 200 or 300 other cereals. That's when a lot of eyes in the room, got a little bit big, because it's, my world is generally professional services, and whether you're an architect or you're an engineer or you're an attorney, or wherever you fall, um, in that professional services world, I, I think, if you're honest, that every person in that world is looking around going, yeah, I'm one of 200 cereals sitting here on the shelf, and at least in the eyes of my clients. Now, sure, I may have a specialty, and and maybe in a certain area, et cetera. But when the client comes looking for that service provider, the architect or whoever it is, that's what they're seeing, is a bunch of cereal on a shelf. And so we, in my work, we have those questions all the time. How do I differentiate myself from, the firm across the street or the firm across town, when, yeah, at the end of the day, even though I may design homes and that one may design museums, a lot of clients are looking out there going, what's the difference? They're both architects. So, what is this one, the sugary Kellogg's, or the sugary Post, or something like that?
Yeah, and by being able to express some specifics about that end user, the decision maker that hires you, it may be the end user. It is sometimes residential, but
Sure. Yeah.
sometimes it's government or schools or whatever. There's maybe a board. By understanding the end user, whoever that may be, and their relationship to the problems and challenges and fears they have. I remember we worked on one. I think they did schools, and the real differentiator they talked about is this idea of future proof. They were experts in future proofing a building.
Right.
And I have never been on a board deciding who to hire to build a school. But that resonated with me because I've seen, I wish my home were configured differently because things have changed. We're now empty nesters, and it would be easier if it was this. We're getting older. There's too many stairs. Our home, built in 1905, is not future proofed at all. And so that resonated with me because it just made sense. I saw the pain, I saw their solution, and I saw the proof right
Yeah.
in their presentation. And that's what we're talking about, having the ability to define yourself in a way. Now, the problem with positioning and that kind of communication, and the challenge for us, is that every time you position yourself around something you do that's unique, you're depositioning yourself from other things. And
Mm.
so the fear always is, but if I say I do this really well, what if that's not what they want? They want something else. And so that causes us to get in these long, 4 or 5 hour meetings where we're redefining ourselves before every pitch because we're trying to guess what it is they're looking for and be that. That's the pathway to failure.
Hmm.
Because first of all, there's a very little chance you're really going to guess what the one thing that's going to pull the trigger. You've got to be who you are and know that that positioning may deposition you from other opportunities, but it's going to open doors up for replacement opportunities to those that you've lost. And it's easy to say. I know that it's easy to say, but it is possible, and I've seen it done in service organizations as well as in small businesses, every kind of business, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just a minute or so ago, you talked about that deep understanding of the customer or the client, understanding what their problems, their pains, their fears are. And I think that's where it starts, right? If we, and so what I preach, basically, what I teach with my clients is if you know your clients, so if you're an architect or you're an attorney, whoever you are, if you know your clients' business or life or lifestyle, whatever their context is, if you know that better than anyone else, any of your competition, then you're going to win, right? Because
Yeah.
you're going to be able to speak specifically to those unique problems, et cetera, the better than anybody else. And once people
Yeah.
realize that, getting back to the positioning piece of it, once people realize that, you're going to be the go-to.
Right. And now, depending on who's in the audience today, if it's purely AEC, this may not fit perfectly, but I remember a time that I was working with P&G, and I was trying to help them understand um, the Asian market perception of really doing laundry. That the ask was, we want to learn about. They specifically said women who do the laundry, but we don't want to think of them just as someone who turns on a machine. We
Mm.
really want to understand them. And so we were using social media in this case, and we started looking at social media posts within China, and we found this overwhelming number of posts where people talk, where women specifically. By the way, we also found out they shouldn't just be talking to women. We found out that there's a vast movement going on, starting on the west coast of USA and going all the way into the large cities in China, where there's a redefining of what it means to be a man, including sometimes doing the laundry. So that's a different issue. I'm not going to talk about that one. We started to see all these posts where women were talking about wearing the most appropriate color to a job interview, a first date, an anniversary, a business meeting. There were tons of these conversations. And it really intrigued us because we didn't find that in the Western world. And we just, color is, it was like, know your color, in the Western world. And this was what your color communicates. And they were
Mm.
talking about what an embarrassment it is when you wear the wrong color. And as we did more research, we found out that there is a vast and significant number of people that talk in terms of color being a way they communicate certain values. And so what we shared with Saatchi, their agency in Europe, is uh, this concept. And the sad thing is I never know if they actually use it in the end, because then it takes P&G then 5 years before they use the research that you did. But the concept became, if color communicates, why would you mute your own voice? And so this became far different than just talking about, we can clean stains, we can reduce wrinkles, these kind of generic claims that are category wide. They could start talking in these emotional terms because they had done the work of understanding the consumer. Hopefully, that's why they do research all the time. Hopefully, better than their competition in China.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so a great example of understanding and developing empathy for the client, the end user, whatever's appropriate for your product or service. Um, when we think about the book, when we think about overcoming the innovation killers, can, can you walk us through just
Sure.
a structure of what's in the book and what the big takeaways are?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, on the back cover of the book, there's this chart. This chart is the most important thing. It tells the story of the structure of the book from start to finish, because this is what we're really trying to get across. That there are three primary, there's actually more, but we think these are the primary ones that kill innovation: product similarity, competition sprawl, and marketplace static. And marketplace static being that in the marketplace, whether or not you're unique, there's so much noise. Sometimes people can't hear you. Have you ever heard the term noise to signal ratio?
Yeah, yeah.
It's the idea of how much noise overwhelms the actual signal you're trying to get. Big issue in astronomy, because they are trying to get a single narrow band noise that they're trying to understand, and they've got all this noise of the universe around them. And so there has to be clarity that impacts each of those. And we've divided it into contextual clarity for product similarity. So understand the context. That's what we did with P&G. We understood the context beyond the product. We understood what color meant in the life of the decision maker. Contextual clarity. Now, in the retail world, we often use social media. You often have to take a slightly different approach when it's B2B service. And then competition sprawl, we address that. We call it creative clarity, but we don't mean creative in how creative you are, how wacky you are. We mean clarity about what you're creating.
Okay.
And so it's really critical to understand specifically the job the decision maker is trying to do. The idea of the job to be done goes back to 92 when a man named Clay Christensen at Harvard developed this framework for innovation all around trying to understand the most important job the decision makers trying to get done. So you battle competition sprawl, you battle the thousands of cereal boxes by really executing against a very specific job. And then with marketplace static, we talk about competitive clarity. So really understanding how you fit within the competitive set, understanding related to the job, what kind of form factor does the decision maker want, what motivates those. So once you start addressing this, and even just having a general philosophy, we call it a culture of clarity. We're
Mm.
almost obsessed with addressing those things every single day. You'll make mistakes, but because you philosophically have bought into this idea that I've got to create a culture of clarity within my organization and my communication, you're way ahead of the game when you get to that point.
That's a really interesting point. It's it strikes me again through my lens from professional services. Um, this applies to firms of one, right? If we've got one professional that has trouble clarifying what they do, the value that they bring, of course, it starts to be amplified, I suppose, if you have two or three or 50 employees when there's this lack of clarity, and that's one of the biggest struggles in my world is, um, why doesn't the general public, why don't my clients see the value or understand the value in what we do, whatever it is that we do? Well, my um, as kind and gentle as possible response has to be, because you're not doing a good job of clarifying that for them. You're
That's
not doing a
exactly
good
right.
job of communicating clearly what that value is. And of course, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's they're going to define what they value, but now we've got to find alignment. We've got to communicate that alignment, and it always reminds me of Donald Miller, who many that will see this or will be familiar with Donald Miller, the
Huge fan of Donald Miller.
Absolutely, absolutely. His latest is called "Business Made Simple," but going back a couple of books now to the Building a Story brand. His tagline is, "If you confuse, you lose." And there's an awful lot of us that need to embrace that and keep that in mind more often, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I became a fan of Donald Miller's even before he moved into business when he was writing fiction,
Yeah.
and his fiction was so crystal clear to me. Unlike the movie that was made based on one of his early books, was not very clear, but his fiction was so clear. It almost was, when I saw that he had gone into this idea of storytelling within business, I almost breathed a sigh of relief, because it said to me, "Man, this guy's committed to clarity already. What a great move for him, and it's going to help a little." So it
Yeah.
is. You confuse, you lose. Because when we talk about it in terms of fear, and you're trying to make a decision, you've got to have some overwhelming motivation for people to overcome the fear of change
Mm.
and replace it with, or the fear of same. You've got to replace fear of change with fear of same. And so if they look at it and say, well, everything is kind of okay now, I'm confused about what these people do or the benefit or something. There's confusion there. Every time, just about every time, they're going to just make a decision to either stay with the incumbent, make no decision at all if they can, or take the safest route.
Yeah.
Sometimes that comes out, especially in the advertising world, when they're confused, they end up just picking the cheapest provider because they're not clear on the differentiation. Therefore, they must all be the same. So I'm going to pick. It's going to be a commodity decision for me.
Yeah, that's a really great point for anybody that's out there that feels like you're being commoditized. If you are not presenting a reason that they should choose you over anybody else, right? If you look the same and sound the same and act the same as everybody else, there's one more reason. It's one more reason to make a choice, and it's not the one that you want. It's my guess.
Yeah. My teams throughout my time in the marketing field in advertising, they would get irritated at me because when we would leave and sometimes at the airport or sometimes a few days later, we'd get the call from the person we pitched, the company we pitched, and they'd say, we've gone with so-and-so and we always try to find out why did you do that. And they'll say, well, to be quite honest, everything seemed pretty much the same. And we just went with the cheapest provider.
Yeah.
And then we hang up and the team would get so ticked off at the prospect. And I would always say, wait, it's our fault. How can you say that? They made the decision based on something they didn't tell us they were going to make it on. They made the decision based on price. And they specifically said, we're not going to make this decision on price. But three companies gave them three options that were identical. Why would they pick the most expensive? Why wouldn't they pick the cheapest? We did not differentiate ourselves. Therefore, they made the decision with the only thing they could. And nobody gets in trouble for saving the company money.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You did not arm them with what they needed to make a decision other than on price.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a tough pill to swallow for, I guess, everybody, but I was going to say a lot of different companies, a lot of different businesses, but that's tough. So maybe to bring it back around to innovation, what is innovation?
Well, as we talk about it in the book, and this may be where there may be a little bit of disconnect with a service audience, although I would argue there's relevant relationship between the concepts. We're talking about product development, creating a product when we talk about innovation. But keep in mind that all innovation, when a new product is created, it is really all based on trying to understand what a missed kind of gap need that the consumer has. So when somebody, let me just make up an example. Let's say I'm working for a company that makes canned food, and they specialize in canned tomatoes. And then they find out through maybe ethnographic work, they go in and they watch people cooking, and they notice how frustrated they get at chopping up the tomatoes and then knowing which things to add to make this a Mexican meal, or which spices do I use for an Italian meal, or what if I want to go Greek? What do I do? And they find this and they talk to them and they understand this, and all of a sudden they come out with a line called meal starters, and it's Italian tomatoes, Mexican tomatoes. I think Rotel might do some things like this. Greek tomatoes, Thai tomatoes. They come out with all these products. That's what we're talking about. That kind of having an insight, which leads to an idea, which leads to a product, which then leads to being on the store shelf and should lead to sales.
So sure, that's a product-based example. Totally get it. But I think there is there's a parallel example in the service world, in the professional services world. You think about where we are today. This is today's July 1st. 2021. 1st of July, 2021. And so that must mean that we're about, about 18 months past, not quite 18 months past where, at least in the US, based on the US timeline, where things started to shut down because of the pandemic. It's
Hmm.
maybe a little bit different depending on where you are, where you're watching this from in the world. But, when I think about, um, again, an architect or an attorney or an accountant, anybody in professional services, their clients, right? An accountant's client's world has been turned upside down
Hmm.
because of everything that's happened in the pandemic or during the pandemic with things being shut down. Same with attorneys and architects, et cetera. And so what I encourage all professionals to do is have these conversations with your clients and say, what was going on in January of 2020? And then what happened in March and April and May? How have things changed? And then I would also encourage them to say, because things I believe are still pretty fluid, what do things look like 3 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, something like that. But the point of all that is that there are new problems today that need to be solved that didn't even exist 18 months ago, right? In their client's world, things have changed, things have happened that create new opportunities, that
Yeah,
create new
absolutely.
problems that need
Yeah.
to be solved. And I think that's parallel to the different tomatoes,
Well,
right?
I
The
think it
tomatoes,
is. I mean, we don't right now. You talk about the AEC world. We don't know right now if this concept of hybrid working and
yeah,
more people working at home is going to continue. And I would add also learning at home.
right,
Clearly, if it continues, it's going to change the way spaces need to be created.
right,
If the fear of viruses continues, it is theoretically possible that offices may able to be smaller because of the hybrid working, but there may be a greater desire to not have open office space
right,
so that I'm a little safer when I'm in the office. Well, you talk about that. Going to open office space was a huge change from the past. If we go back to more of an enclosed offices or offices with just a few, two or three people working in a cell or something, that's going to really change. And it's not because we're trying to start a new fad. We're trying to understand the fears and the context uh, of those end users. And so if they still have some latent fears, how do we address that beyond just putting up hand washing stations
right,
and putting people 6 feet apart with plexiglass? I mean, that's a temporary solution. It's a good solution for temporary, but there's got to be some permanent impact over how people are thinking. Now, if I were working for an architecture firm and they asked me, well, we'd like to understand this, one of the very few first things I would start looking at would be social media. And I want to find the people that are just complaining loudly because they're the ones that give me insight into where the dissatisfaction and the fear really is. And
mm,
I would start looking at social media right now and saying, okay, how are people talking differently now about their office space than they were talking back when prior to the pandemic? That again is one of those you're always looking for an internal source that motivates change and an external force. Internal meaning employees and your current client base. External being potential clients and events in the world.
mm,
And so any one of those four areas can change how you think about your business. We have to be hypersensitive to all these signals. Sometimes we call them weak signals. We have to be able to crank up so that we're really tapped into the weak signals so that we can make these changes faster and more effectively than our competition.
As you're describing that, it strikes me that there are a lot of people, um, a lot of companies who are gearing up to bring people back to the office. And like you said, it may be hybrid. Who knows what that particular company's version of this getting back to the office looks like or means. And they'll certainly be figuring it out as they go, I think. Um, and on the other side, maybe of that decision-making table, of course, are employees that feel like they don't have any control over some of these things, who may not be very happy about uh, having to go back to the office. They've been home for 15, 16, 17, whatever months. And some of that may be, hey, I've gotten really used to working in my pajamas, and some of it may be um, uh, the childcare um, dynamic has still never been addressed or solved, or it may be fear, like you said, I just talked to somebody yesterday that has put a 1-year pause on what they do because um, of health concerns. So it's going to be at all kinds of levels and lots of dynamics there. But that's a really good point. If you are a professional services person, or product manager, like you said, understanding these things, I think, is what's going to understanding it better than your competition is one of the things that's going to help you propel yourself to the front.
Yeah, and I would add an element to that of I don't know if this is prevalent now, but it might be. But I remember when we first started talking about millennials in force, and I would constantly, and as consumers, I'd constantly hear this idea of millennials are entitled. They think they're entitled. They think they're entitled, and that always frustrated me because it's fine if some commentator wants to say that. But as a marketer or an innovator, any kind of communicator, because I consider innovation part of communication. Innovation is creating a product that has a feature that's based on having had a dialogue with my
Oh,
decision
good point.
makers.
Yeah.
Uh, we don't have the freedom to make fun of the next generation. Our goal is to understand them and why, the context of why they're saying what they're saying. For example, the idea of working at home, I remember, and this may date me a little bit, but I remember when we first started talking at the last agency I worked for before I went on my own about people working at home. And the kind of language was, well, first of all, why are these people so entitled that they think they should be able to work at home? I never did that when I was their age. And I'm like, yeah, but also, they don't ride a horse to work. I mean, things change. And the idea was that, or part of how they position it was, how do we know they're working?
Right.
By hitting their deadlines. How do we know they're not distracted by the quality of their work? And we had to go through this very long multi-year process to get the current generation to understand that the context was different. And the reason it was different is because they're sitting there choosing who they're going to date, paying their bills, tracking their credit score, buying a car, all from their phone or from their tablet. And they've got faster. This actually happened. Our internet went down at the agency, and almost everyone went home because they knew they had faster, more reliable internet at home. Now that's crazy. And it dawned on me then. People are getting up in the morning, getting ready, having breakfast, or with millennials probably not having breakfast, driving through traffic, impacting the atmosphere, impacting the environment, coming to work, logging on, use slower internet, and be distracted by people walking around asking them questions. And so it's not a matter of entitlement, it's a matter of awareness. They were aware that I can do this at home. I know I can. And it took a worldwide pandemic to convince business owners that they really could do it.
Yeah. 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 It'll be really interesting to see how that continues to evolve.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, there's wide-ranging implications here, um, for service providers, for products, for um, real estate investors, for
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know
overall
what this is going
spectrum.
to mean, but like our business, I work with a company called Consumer Clarity as their chief innovation officer. And what we have is we're committed to remaining a virtual company. And so what we have all the services we need, many of them given to us by Google in exchange for knowing every single thing about us. We use these Google tools. We're able to communicate, save files, pass things back and forth to one another. Very easy for us to have 3, 4, 5 meetings a day, face to face. Sometimes just go on and leave the other person's face in the corner, and it's like you're working at the same desk. But we do have a membership to Office Key because we realize there are times we've got to look one another across each table in the face. We've got to have times that we can meet with clients. You can't really do that very comfortably at home. I really don't want to mix that up and be meeting clients in the living room of my house. So we've got Office Key. So now the whole structure has changed to where I don't have to own the space. I can make a change even if I don't like the way they're keeping. If all of a sudden I find out they've hired new janitors, it's dirty, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so, how's that going to impact how we create spaces for business? How's it going to impact how we create spaces for homes? Because now we've got a triumvirate here. We've got a business that's operated out of my home office here. I got to think, is this appropriate for work? Do I have everything I need? I'm renting space. Is that appropriate for every single need? My partner, is that appropriate for his need? And as we hire other people, is it appropriate for their needs? And so all of a sudden now, residential can be impacted,
Mm-hmm.
business is impacted, and space that is rented collaboratively, the collaborative working is a different thing than building out an office. And so all of a sudden now, the idea of being a specialist in creating office space becomes a whole different thing.
Right, right. And we thought it was going to be all about flying cars.
Yeah, I get bummed out when I think about it being 2021 because I was convinced by 2021 I'd be able to take a vacation to the moon, and I wouldn't have to think about what I was going to eat because I'd have a pill I could pop in my mouth and I could put on my jetpack and go to work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one day, one day.
Yeah, I didn't know the big change was going to be that it's easier to do something like this while I'm sitting in my home.
Exactly. Yeah. Well. I guess you could see Mr. Spacely right from your Jetsons home on the TV screen. So I guess we got part of it
Yeah,
right.
they did get part of it right. Well, they got the Ruby, the
Yeah.
housemaid. She's basically a Roomba.
True.
Treadmills are really important, but they're in the house, not outside of it.
Right.
Big screen TVs, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So
Well,
they
we
got
got some of it.
actually they predicted the future.
Yeah. Not too bad. Not too bad. Well, let me ask you this. Um, when we think about the book, overcoming the innovation killers, uh, who should buy this book and why should they read it?
I think we kind of addressed that at the beginning. I really think
Mhm.
uh, any anybody who's looking at their business and saying, "I'm feeling like I'm starting to be commoditized. I'm feeling like I'm in a sea of sameness. Uh, I I'm struggling to differentiate my offering. What do I do about that?" Really, that phrase, I love that phrase, a sea of sameness. Just a very short story. We were doing research for P&G on laundry soap. And we did this one technique where we had people create stories of them buying the product. And one of the respondents was shooting his video as he's walking down the aisle. And it was really all about high efficiency
Hmm.
washers and how they decide on that. And he's holding his phone and he's holding it so you can see the products he's looking at. And he goes, "Oh, they don't have the one my wife told me to get, but there's another orange bottle here. That must be okay." And he picked it up and put it in his basket. And when P&G saw that, they cracked up. But I said, you got to understand, you think it's differentiated because it has an HHE on it. The consumer thinks it's different when the bottle's a different color.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole different thing. So anybody like that my product, my service, I mean, think about architecture. Architecture firms generally, unless I'm completely wrong about the industry, and you can tell me I'm an idiot. They do the same thing, mostly in the same way, delivering the same product, often for very close to the same price. That's a recipe for commoditization.
Right.
Ad agencies, same product. They all say they are the most creative and do the best creative work. They all say their work is based on insights. There's got to be something else. So anybody who's struggling with that, how do I break out of this noise and get noticed? There's got to be something more than just posting a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn that I can do. Did that answer the question? Long answer for a really simple question.
Yeah. No. That's a good answer. And I think you're right on about, I mean, at its root, that's one of the big challenges for architecture firms and ad firms and a lot, and creative professionals and professional services. So, where's the best place for people to learn more about you?
You can probably the easiest one, the one to remember is easiest to remember is my website, jeffjones.com. And that'll take you can get it. You can see the books. It talks about the books. There's some sample files you can download that will help you go through some of the process if you're still unsure about whether or not you want to spend money. So that's probably the best place.
Okay.
And then even if you want to hop over, there's a link there to hop over to Consumer Clarity's website, which is kind of the part of my life where I focus on doing research.
And is that just consumerclarity.com?
Yes, it is.
So right now, as Jeff said, the easiest is jeffjones.com. That's on the screen right now. And then if you want to know more about Consumer Clarity, there it is on the screen. Hopefully I spelled it right, consumerclarity.com.
You did.
And of course, you can purchase copies of Jeff's books at wherever you purchase books, I assume, but specifically Amazon, since you still may be shopping from your couch.
Yeah.
Might be the easiest place to find them.
Yeah, they're on Amazon. Overcoming the Innovation Killers is available, as you said, from Audible. We haven't had a chance to record the 7 keys to persuasive speaking. We're working on a second edition of that one, updating it a little bit, and then we're going to record that one and put it on Audible.
Got it. And if you've enjoyed this conversation with Jeff, he narrates Overcoming the Innovation Killers on Audible.
Not sure you should have said that. That might decrease my sales.
Well, sorry about that. No, I always appreciate it. Like I said, that's Audible's my place. I set a goal in 2019 to read or listen to 12 books over the course of the year, and I think one of the best things I have done from a development aspect ever was to blow that goal out of the water. I hit almost 30, I think, in 2019, and I've kept up an increased pace every year. And so I don't know what my library on Audible looks like, but it's a lot. I listen very intently. I bookmark a lot of things and go through a lot of books, and really appreciate recommendations and suggestions that people send my way. I also create my reading list. I post my reading list on my website. But I really appreciate it when the authors narrate their own books. And I remember when, I'm not going to say what book it was. I was about to say what book it was, but I started into it, and the author narrated the foreword, I guess it was. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful. Wonderful voice. I had met them before. I had seen them on stage before, that type of thing. Wonderful voice. And I was really enjoying the forward. And then it got to chapter 1, and it switched over to a voiceover artist. And that was that was a huge disappointment to me. Not that the voiceover artist did a bad job or anything like that, but it the expectation, of course, was set when the author read the forward, and then a completely different character came on for the rest of the book. So, all that being said, thank you for narrating your own book.
Well, you're welcome. It was against advice actually, because when you publish through Audible, they very strongly suggest you don't read your own book. And for
Really?
some reason, I'm just like, I don't think I can get across what I need to emphasize
Mhm.
to a reader.
That's
And so
interesting.
I want to do it myself.
Yeah, I will have to dig into that more, because a lot of the books that I listen to are narrated by the authors. So that's my
Yeah,
favorite
like
part.
even fiction ones. Like I couldn't imagine listening to a Neil Gaiman book and not have Neil Gaiman read it.
Yeah.
He's got a fantastic voice, and
Mhm.
he pronounces the things the way they should be pronounced, and it's just a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I guess not everybody has a voice for it. Um, but I do enjoy it. And I think you did this maybe a few times during the book. You kind of take a little bit of an aside, right? Here's a
Yeah,
little bit of an addition to the what's published in the written version, and I think that's fantastic, right? Just a sort of a further exploration of it. So enjoy that. And if any of you are interested, I just put the link to my reading list on my website. You can check out. It is primarily targeted at architects, but there's there's where you can find my reading list on
excellent.
the screen. So, Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on here with me. Thanks for this conversation. Thanks for both the books at this point. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
if anybody wants to get in contact with Jeff, that you want to know more, again, go to jeffjones.com. Pretty simple. A
And my
couple of
email
days.
address is easy to remember too. It's me@jeffjones.com.
There you go. Me at jeffjones.com if you want to reach out directly to Jeff. And find out more about what he does. Maybe if you've got any questions about the book or the content, or how to work with him, there it is on the screen. Me at jeffjones.com. So, Jeff, thanks. Congratulations again. And
Thank you.
yeah, good luck on the sales of the book, and looking forward to seeing the next version of the 7 Keys to Persuasive Speaking.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you again sometime soon.